So I want to introduce our speaker for tonight, who's Dan Haslam. Dan is an ex-lawyer who saw the light. He refashioned himself, no offense to John Brick, as a tour guide extraordinaire. He is a worldwide guide for Walkabout International. So Dan is a board member of the Gaslamp Quarter Historical Foundation and has been for many years. He's also bi-coastal. He's come to us direct from Cape Cod, where he spends part of the year. He's also an avowed dog lover, and his dog Susie was a frequent guest of Bum's. Dan?
Okay, good. So we've got about 30 slides that sort of tell the story of Bum, the official town dog of San Diego. And I know many of you know about Bum, so I want to give you some backstories about Bum's life and things that you might not know about Bum, because that sort of makes it more interesting than just the boring historical facts. This is the photograph, basically, that was used to create the model that we have of Bum over here. And it was done by a Tucson artist. So we're basically celebrating Bum and his life. He came to San Diego from San Francisco. He was from a litter. He was basically a spaniel dog mixed with a little bit of Saint Bernard, and came down to San Diego on a ship. He was a stowaway on the ship, came off of Fifth Avenue Pier, and belonged to nobody. He was the dog who belonged to no one. So that's our first slide. And just a word on the cartoons that you're going to see here. They were done by Orville James. And Orville James was a machinist. He was a tool designer out of La Mesa. He was a car enthusiast. And he came up with the idea of creating cartoons that would appear in the local San Diego newspaper. So he did about maybe 50, 100, something like that, of these cartoons, and they would run every so often, once a week, once a day, over a period of years. So what happened, Mr. James died in 1993, and everything sort of went underground at that point. Around 2005, somewhere in that era, his daughter saw a presentation that we had. We were still raising money for the creation of the Bum and Bobby project, and she came to us and said, I have all the original plates. And so we were absolutely delighted to have them, because this is really the story that everybody knows about Bum, the urban legend. And she gave them to the foundation so we have total publication rights. Someday we need to take all of the plates, and as we have done with the reissue of the Bum book, we need to do like a coloring book for kids, because we can do that, and it would be great for kids. So this one, it says it was the first ashore for Bum. When Santa Rosa docked in San Diego, he decided that a seagoing life was not meant for him. Well, it was good, because Bum escaped the hangman's noose up in San Francisco. His mother and the other puppies were euthanized because there were too many dogs running around San Francisco. He comes to San Diego, comes off the ship, becomes the dog who belongs to nobody. Next slide, please. So Bum comes in here, and he's basically a puppy at that point. And he doesn't, as I said, he doesn't belong to anybody, so he's got to have a living, he's got to find his way around, and he befriends a man by the name of Awo Su. And Awo Su lived in Chinatown, which was then basically 3rd Avenue, 2nd Avenue, going all the way down to the harbor. Awo Su was a fisherman, and I tried very hard to find out where Awo Su actually lived. And I think he lived on one of the they had elevated huts where the fishermen lived, and they had them all along the waterfront on the San Diego Bay. I think he lived there, but I went through all the town records, and there was a Sioux family who lived on 3rd Avenue. Don't know if they were exactly Awo Su's people or not. But Awo Su took him in. This cartoon says that He provided a home and took good care of Bum whenever Bum permitted him to do so. Bum was a free spirit, did not want to live with anybody in particular, didn't want to belong to anybody. But it said, however, Bum did not have the gift of personal attachment common to most dogs, which unfitted him for domestic life. Although he was a no one-man dog, Bum was that much everybody's dog. So Awo-Su takes him in, and he will reappear during the whole course of Bum's life as he goes on. Next, please. So Bum got into a little trouble, sort of midlife, and he went to a Republican rally in El Cajon. And I don't want to besmirch the Republican Party at all, but they were drinkers. And they thought it was hilarious that, we'll give this dog a beer, we'll give him some rum, we'll get him liquored up. So he did, and then he became an alcoholic. And that was kind of sad because he got kind of mangy on the streets of San Diego. And he would go over to the Army barracks. The barracks were built by Davis for the U.S. government. And if you go over to Seaport Village, there's a plaque there. It's just right near Pantoja Park. But there's a big condominium that's located there. And that's where the barracks are located. This became our first elementary school in downtown San Diego. So it's sort of across the street from where the police station is now located, what's that called, the station or the headquarters, thank you, across the street from that. So this is where, but the soldiers would go over and they thought it was kind of cute, and they would give Bum his brew as well. So that's what's going on with that. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we celebrate tonight is not only the republication of the Marie Hitchcock book, but all things literary about Bum. And so that's really was the sort of the focus that I had on Bum's life. We have over in our little gift shop over here, we've got Bum bags, we have Bum magnets, Bum pens, Bum little things that are done. But there's a number of publications that were done over the years which talked about Bum's life. Not just the Orville James cartoons, but newspaper articles. The children of Sherman School got together in one year and they created a little Christmas book about Bum. And I brought a copy of that if anybody wants to see it after the presentation. It's no longer in print, but they sort of republished it, so I brought that along, and it told the life of Bum with Awo-Su. So that's what they're talking about here. It was even Bum had faults. Well, his biggest fault was that he basically would get drunk and lie down in the middle of the street, and he wasn't taking care of himself. And so the fellow there in the upper left is, I think, one of the bank officers, and he's holding up this little booklet that was done by the children of Sherman Heights. Okay, next slide, please. So one of the things that Bum did, he was going to take guff from nobody. In his sculpture that you see over here, you'll see that he's missing his right front paw. It's a little shorter over here. His tail seemed to have grown back or expanded on our sculpture over there. But the building that is next door was owned by Till Burns, and Till had a sort of a boxer kind of a dog. And some of the photographs excuse me, that we have of Till Burns' bar has a photograph of the boxer dog. And Bum and the boxer dog got into a fight. And the boxer dog was killed when he was run over by a train. Bum managed to lose his right front paw and part of his tail. It didn't stop him. In later life, Bum would use the stump of his right front paw as a battering ram, and still was sort of the king of the mountain as he ran around San Diego. But here's a picture of the fight and the train thing, the train tracks and everything that was going on in San Diego. It said Bum lost his right front foot in a fight with a bulldog on the railroad tracks in the summer of 1887. So Bum was just over a year old at that point. The loss did not change his disposition to fight other dogs occasionally, but it did change his style. He would get his opponent down and hammer him into submission with the stump of his crippled leg. Next slide, please. So Bum had his accident on the railroad tracks. Awo Su again comes into the life of Bum and takes him home and nurses him back to care, brought him back in. So there's Awo Su right there, and Bum on the operating table. Next slide, please. So Bum, I'm trying to think, I think later on in his life, after this lecture and we're done our festivities, I'm going to take a walk around the block. If anybody wants to go with me, I'll show you some of these scenes where these actual events occurred. You can see some of them as we go around the block. Bum was over at Magwood's, near Magwood's department store. There was a stables behind there. And this is over on the corner of 6th Avenue and Market Street. There's a parking garage there, the 6th and 6th Parket at Market. Are you familiar with that parking garage? Well, that was the location, and there was a stables behind there. Bum got in there and got behind a horse who got scared, reared up, and kicked Bum badly in the gut. And so Bum was, opened up his stomach. So people were very concerned for him. He was, after all, well known in San Diego. And so they ran to get a vet to see to Bum. And the vet said, well, I'm not going to go over there. Who's going to pay my fee? And so the vet refused medical care. So they found a surgeon, a real live human surgeon, said, yeah, I'll come over, take a look at the dog. Came over and sewed him back up. They're probably, I don't know how they ever did pay his fee, but the other doctor was sort of persona non grata in San Diego because people found out about him, that the vet wouldn't care for this dog. And then I think it was Dr. Stone was the actual doctor. So we sort of have superimposed the Orville James cartoon in the lower right, and then the actual photograph. Well, what happened is Bum was pretty beat up from this incident with the horse, but he was going to be on the road to recovery. So, and people were very worried. There were stories that were run in the Union and the Tribune newspapers. So Magwood's department store was out in front of Parket on Market. The stables were located behind. So Magwood's had a big glass window in the front of the store. So what they did is they put Bum on a bed in the glass window, and people could go by and they could see the Bum was in the window of the store, and they would have little reports. Bum is doing better today. Thank you for your concern, that sort of thing. So the headline is Bum rated the best of care when injured. And that was just part of what happened when, and he eventually got better. But, with all these fights and wounds and everything else, I think he should have been called Lucky and not Bum. Okay, we'll do the next slide, please. Here he is. There's the good doctor, Bum under the surgeon's care off to the right. Bum figured very prominently with the children in San Diego. The newspaper boys loved Bum. They would come around and he would follow them around. They would feed him. They would always have reports. Bum just loved the kids. And the other thing, I think there's a slide coming in here which will come up, that Bum was used by the photographers' offices because in the old days, when they took a photograph, like your class picture, they might have 100 kids standing in the class picture, but you had to stand still. And there are some class pictures where somebody started off on the right side and they would run around to the left side, and you can see them twice in the school picture. So the whole idea was the children had to stay very still, pardon me, and they would do so when Bum would be with them. So he was very popular with photographers and with the children who would just sit there, put their hand on Bum and have their photograph taken. So that was just part of his public service to the kids. So here he is under the surgeon's care just before they put him up in the window. Next slide, please. So Bum, one of the most fascinating stories is, have you ever been to a restaurant and they have this is a Gold Star, this is a 5-star restaurant. I can't think of the name of a service, but Michelin, the guide to Michelin recommends this. What Zagat rated? That's the word. Senior moment here. Zagat rated you know that the restaurant is going to be good. So Bum had to be fed. He had no particular owner, but he would go around to the various restaurants throughout the Stingery, as this neighborhood was called, and he would be fed. And they, if he liked to go back, and he would go back to a restaurant from time to time, the restaurant would post a sign out front that said, "Bum eats here." And that was sort of your Zagat rating 4-star. If it was good enough for the town dog, by gosh, it would be good enough for you. Well, Bum's favorite restaurant, which we will see as we go around the block, was the Bay City Market. And this is sort of my little plea to go with me. If you want to know where it is, you got to go. So Bum went on a tour up to Los Angeles. I think there's a slide coming up about that. And when he came back, he went to the Bay City Market where they would feed him. So this was the place that he loved to go. And here's the slide. This one says Bum decided he wanted to go for a trip, and he traveled everywhere. He went over on the ferry over to Coronado, helped sell property over there when they were selling lots. It was very remarkable. And he wanted to go away, so he shows up down at the Santa Fe Depot, climbs on a train, and his friend, who was named Colonel Friend, who was also a newspaper operator and reporter, telegraphed ahead to various stations along the way and say, "Our town dog Bum is on the next train. Please show him every courtesy." And so they did. You know, they got out and they fed him, they took care of him. Bum stayed up in Los Angeles for a couple days, then got back on the train, came back, and then went to the Bay City meat market for his dinner. So he was just famous. You know, they had that on the telegraph, so it was in the newspaper. People were following his travels as he went up north. Okay, next, please. Okay, now somehow or other this got mixed up in there, but this is Bum getting whacked by the horse. It's a little bit out of order. It says, Bum led a carefree sort of life, but he still got his share of knocks. One day he strolled into the stable back of Magwood's department store for a visit with his friend, Mr. Magwood, and got tangled up under the heels of a fractious horse. Luckily, Mr. Magwood was on hand to rescue him, but Bum was pretty severely bruised from the trampling he had taken. Okay, next please. And there he is. So you see his right front paw, and really if you reverse this around, it's kind of like what you're seeing over there. Next please. Okay, so now hopefully you all got one of these little dog tags as evidence of your being here. This is where it comes from. It comes from the Mel James cartoon, or Orville James, but he was called Mel. It says, after his brush with the dog catcher, Bum was given official recognition as the town dog. The city's fathers exempted him from the payment of all license fees, and his picture was placed on dog tags. That was in 1891. So what happened, Bum was out one day just strolling around, and there was this big impetus of people arriving in San Diego from 1885, 1887. There was a big land boom, then there was a bust. And so lots of people were coming here, and because of all the extra dogs that were showing up, the city felt we need to license them. We need to put some controls out there. So unfortunately, Bum had no opportunity to get a license. So the city council passed a resolution that Bum would have a license paid for by the city. So his license number was 587, and he had it on he did have a collar, and he wore it, and but he was exempted from having to pay for it because he was the official town dog. So there he is accepting the award from the city fathers. So hopefully you'll wear this proudly. Next, please. There it is. Okay, next, please. So one of the things that Bum liked to do, he had a lot of civic duties. One of the ones that he loved to do was to run ahead of all the fire engines that went through town. And so whenever there was a fire, and these are the old fire engines that would be pulled by a horse, and they looked like a sort of a tanker, an oil tanker. They had water in them, and they sort of pumped it, to get the water out. But Bum loved, whenever the bells went off, he would be at the head of it and go through. So that was one of his public services. Another is that he went up to City Hall, which was then our courthouse, and he would go, and when the judge went for lunch, Bum would climb up in the judge's chair and keep it warm for the judge. So at the end of the lunch period, Judge would come back and the seat was nice and warm for him. So Bum had his duties doing that. This is one of the many civic obligations which Bum considered his own, was to sit in the judge's chair at the courthouse. If Bum had been human, he would have been more likely to have been an important political figure. We'll see that in a couple of slides, I think. Next, please. This is a different cartoonist. I just wanted to include a couple because it wasn't just Orville James doing cartooning. It was every newspaper, every publication featured stories and things about Bum. So this is Bum marched uninvited at the head of every procession and enjoyed every stop, which was kind of neat. Okay, next please. So this is interesting. Our first president ever to visit San Diego was President Harrison, who came to San Diego, and he started out and had breakfast over on Coronado Island. Then he got on his yacht or the boat and ended up down at the Fifth Avenue Pier to come and have an official procession through San Diego. Well, one of those carriages is President Harrison. The other carriage is Bum. Bum had his own carriage, and he was in the presidential procession. There's no notes that we could find out that, the president came over to shake paws with him or hands, but Bum was there, and we know that he did not go into the official things that were going on, the official party. He was kept outside, but he did have his own horse and carriage, and that was the courthouse, where the current courthouse is down on Broadway. Next, please. So this is one of my favorite stories and probably one of the more esoteric. Bum tried to ingratiate himself wherever he could go in San Diego. And there was a politician who was our local congressman who would have no truck with this town dog. I don't want that dog at my place of business. I don't want to deal with that dog. He's not to come around. And the people were incensed. So there was a political rally, and the people said, we're taking Bum. Bum's going to show up. So Bum showed up, and this was the main entrance of the Hotel Robinson, which was later called, what was originally the Florence Hotel, later the Hotel Robinson, and it was at 4th and Fur. So it was sort of on the outskirts of downtown. So the congressman would have nothing to do with Bum. He did not want him there. The townspeople said, okay, if you don't have Bum come into your hotel and be a guest at the hotel, then we're not going to support you for re-election. Guess what? Bum got in the hotel. So I love that story. Okay, next please. Next slide. Oh, it's there. Sorry, thank you. So this was having won official recognition as San Diego's town dog. Bum decided to spend more time with the organization he loved best, the fire department. The #1 engine company on 3rd near Horton Plaza became his headquarters. The loss of his right front paw did not hamper him too greatly in running with the fire engines. So he did that, and so that was one of the fire stations that he went to. When we go around the block, I'll point out the other one. Bum had a girlfriend. Her name was Daisy, and that was just around the corner from here. And unfortunately, Daisy got run over by one of the horses that was pulling the fire wagon, and Bum became very sad over the loss of his girlfriend Daisy. But he got over it, as he did other things that happened in his life. But he always had a great love of the fire department. Next, please. So, sadly, towards June of 1898, Bum was going downhill. He was 12 years old at that point. There wasn't really anybody keeping him up. He couldn't get around. He had rheumatism, arthritis, all the things that impair an old dog. And so the city father said, we think we need to put Bum down. There was an article in the paper. And the people said, you can't do that to Bum. He's our town dog. So there's a picture of Bum in the little circle that you see in there. And so what they said, they had reconsideration. They said, well, one thing we could do, because the man who ran the poor farm, I don't know if you are familiar with what a poor farm was, but in the old days, before the advent of welfare, if you were down on your luck and you had nowhere else to go and you didn't have family to take care of you, you went to the poor farm. It's sort of like that place of last resort. Kind of like Anna Shepard running the county hospital out of this house. That was it. That was your last place that you were going to show up. So the Poor Farm was, if you go down Texas Street, you go down there, was TGF Fridays, which I think is now defunct, and now there's a climbing wall or some sort of interior gymnasium. In that location was the Poor Farm, and when you went there, you were basically on the county dole, and it was not something you were proud of, that you were taking charity and people were supposed to be independent and all of that. So you grew your own vegetables, you sort of did your own laundry, you worked for your keep. Well, the man who ran that said, "We'll take Bum, we'll take care of him. This is, we take care of everybody who needs help." So Bum went there, and there was a bunny rabbit. That was sort of the mascot who lived at the Poor Farm. So Bum comes in, and Bum, even though he's 12 years old, is still rather feisty. So he decides that he wants to take a meal out of this rabbit, make the rabbit a meal. But at that point he had very few teeth, so he just basically gummed the rabbit a little bit, and that was the end of the rabbit. Was fine. Bum didn't kill it. But during the night in November, Bum went to sleep. He was sleeping outdoors and just never woke up. That was it. I think there's another slide about Bum. So here it is. The infirmities of old age were catching up with Bum, becoming crippled up with rheumatism. He was placed in the county hospital, which is not quite right, it was the Poor Farm, then located in Mission Valley by order of the County Board of Supervisors. Bum had often gone there as a visitor to cheer the inmates, but now at last he was going as a patient. So the interesting thing is that when Bum died, shall we go to the next slide? We'll see. I think there might be one more there. When Bum died, the children who loved Bum, and he loved the children, were so sad that he was gone, that at Magwood's department store had a sort of a can out in front in the window, and the kids could come by. This is at Magwood's, and they could leave pennies and nickels and change so that Bum would have a proper funeral. Unfortunately, we do not know where Bum is buried, and we believe that he's buried out where the Poor Farm was. Well, there's a fellow by the name of Seth Manios, I think I've got that name right, who is the head of the archaeological department at SDSU. And I met up with him. He's the archaeologist who did the work in Old Town. If you've been up to the cemetery in Old Town, you may be familiar that they discovered that they took this device that they could go like a sonar device and find that there were bones under the streets on Old Town Boulevard, and they put little brass plaques there. If you ever go to Old Town in front of that cemetery and on the sidewalk, those mark the graves of where people were actually buried at one point. So Seth tried to go to the owners of TGF Fridays, said we'd like to bring the sonar equipment and see if we could locate Bum, and they would not allow it. And unfortunately, after TJF closed down, they built this new building there. We will never know if his bones ended up in Mission Valley there. We simply won't know. But there was apparently enough money for a proper funeral. One of the things that Marie Hitchcock did, and I checked very carefully her records, is that at one point she wrote that he was buried in Mission Valley. She actually states that happened. And where she got that information, I don't know. So the interesting thing is Bum is not buried here, but we do have the memorial for him, and Greyfriars Bobby is obviously buried in Scotland. But the interesting thing, there are two dogs buried underneath these statues. And in 2007, when they were putting the statues in place here, I had carried around the ashes of one of my pet dogs who had been a service dog. Her name was PJ. For years and years, I don't know what to do with these. They were riding around in the car with me. And our executive director at that time, Tracy Silberman, her dog, she had a black lab named Freeway, and they were always frequent guests down here at the museum. So we decided, well, why not plant them underneath the statues? So my dog PJ's ashes are underneath the concrete base, or form part of the concrete base for Greyfriars Bobby, and then Freeway is underneath Bum. So there are actually a couple dogs here. And my most recent dog, Susie, is in the bird bath over here. So I found that this is a good, inexpensive place to take the dog's ashes. So anyway, we don't know where Bum is, but we know that there are other dogs here in the dog park, in the pocket park. Okay, next slide, please. So here's a picture in the lower left-hand corner. These are two kids having their photograph taken, and you'll see that Bum is with them, keeping them nice and still so they can have a photograph. And then this is the book that talks about Bum's life. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and then this is the obituary for Orville James, and it talks about he was from El Cajon, and he died in 1993. And talks about all the slides that he had done. So we have these, that we put them on display a few years ago. Do you remember that when we put them on the wall? Yes, Kaliki Rodriguez is here, and we put them all in frames and we stuck them on the wall. You know that tape that you can get? They say, oh, it's so wonderful, that MGM tape or whatever. You glue them on the walls. Well, they kept falling off. So they were forever breaking, but we did have them up on the wall. We had all of them at one point there, the life of Bum. Okay, next please. And then this tells about it. This was the series coming out, I think it was in the 50s or 60s that it started. Next please. And then this is probably the most famous photograph that we have of Bum. And in order to get him, they want him to pose for this photograph. And in order to get that, you see the man there on the right, and he's holding something. It's a donut. And Bum is looking up. This is his next meal, you know. So that was great. I love that picture. We have that, I think, up in the store. In the store. It's in the store now, but it's in the museum. So I think is that the last slide? I think that's it. So that's my presentation, and again, at the end of the evening, if you'd like to take a walk around the block, I'll show you some of the sites that are related to Bum. So thanks so much for being here, and we all celebrate his life.
So you may have noticed, I'm sure you did, that Bum is not the only statue in this park. We also have a statue of Greyfriars Bobby. And we have another special guest with us today. Chrissy Ambler is the president of the San Diego Edinburgh Sister Cities, and she's going to give us a little idea of how Bobby came to rest in our park and how Bum now resides in Edinburgh.
So 22 years before the statues were here, we had a mayor, was it O'Connor, Wayne? Marie O'Connor, right? And we were here, and the president of the Edinburgh San Diego Twinning Association, our counterpart, was here and met the mayor and said, you know, we have brother dogs, and their lives were very much the same. And I just want to give you 3 examples of how they were the same. As Greyfriars Bobby passed, Bum was born. And Greyfriars Bobby in Edinburgh, they would have a cannon go off at the castle. And being good Scots, they did not have a 12 noon because it would have to go off 12 times. They had a 1 o'clock cannon. And so when the cannon would go off, Greyfriars Bobby would go, time to eat, and would go bumming around the city to get food. So just like our Bum, he would get his food from everyone. He belonged to a policeman. He was a Bobby, and that's what they called their policeman. And when his master passed, he followed them to the graveyard, and then everybody left. And he goes, well, I still smell him. And for 14 years, he slept on his master's grave. Now the reason we have the stone there is that's how the grave stones are there, and then they would write their name on them. His master was just off to the side, but he would hide underneath there, and that's how he was able to be there through the bad weather and everything. The graveyard was, and the kirk that was there, was in one of the poorest areas in Edinburgh. And children were there, and they were so poor they could not have a pet. So he was every child's pet, and they would play with him and do all these things during the day. The cannon would go off, he'd get some food from the different establishments, and then nighttime came and he would go underneath there, and they would shoot him out because they had gates like this. They'd shoo him out, but he'd find a way to get back in to sleep on his master's grave.